Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad. A question was asked, brother, what are your thoughts on the so-called terrorist attack being covered in the news? I can't help thinking that it could be a false flag event. I weep for my brothers and sisters in the U.S. It's moments like these that make me appreciate being an expat abroad. So may Allah reward us in you and forgive us in you and guide us in you and bless us in you for such a thoughtful question, which requires truly a thoughtful answer, but we'll just try to do the best we can. So first and foremost, our hearts go out to the victims of the egregious attack that took place, I believe, in Louisiana. And as we grieve during all attacks, for example, what's going on in Palestine, the people who are being slaughtered and terrorized through state terror, likewise in Syria and other places. So evil is nothing new since the devil was created, the shaitan, and that he refused to prostrate to Adam, alayhi salatu wasalam, as is mentioned in the Quran. So evil exists and evil will exist. And I think one of the things that we have to know and understand is that these kind of evil actions will occur from time to time. And we, as the information is new, this particular event, we don't know all the details. The details are arising. And of course, we're relying upon a lot of media, a lot of, as President Trump would say, fake news. And that does not negate the suffering. It does not negate the sorrow. It does not negate the evil of which was perpetrated. But as far as knowing exactly all the details about the actors, I think this will take time, if ever, that it becomes known. Because as the questioner mentioned, there are cases of false flags where it may be an internal action of state terrorism in order to build the hype, in order to clamp down on minority groups such as Muslims and African Americans or whoever they wish to imprison. As we know, with all the tensions that are rising, Islamophobia has arisen since the conflict or since the slaughter and the genocide taking place in Palestine. So with that being the case, we know that there's usually repercussions when these types of evil actions take place. Something critical, though, I do want to mention to my Muslim brothers and sisters especially, is that we should never be in denial that we have and we have had evil elements within Islam, meaning Islam is free from this. But there are evil actors, people who kill, people who assassinate, people who do terrorism, people who do every kind of evil, everything that takes place on the planet Earth. There are people who may adhere to Islam. They may be real true adherents to Islam, but they're obviously in this area, they are not. Or so they can be deviant, or they can be of those people who claim to be Muslim. They could be hypocrites. And so there's a lot of different things to unpack. This is going to be a long answer. But however, so my general thoughts, first and foremost, as I already mentioned, we feel sorrow because there are many mafasid, many wicked things that are the result of this. It causes mistrust between the communities. It causes harm to Muslim minorities. It causes harm to the dawah, to the propagation of Islam. It causes harm to, people who are trying to set a good example of what a Muslim is and what Islam is and what the Quran represents as the revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it distorts and supersedes as far as noise for a lot of the people. And it gives justification to those people who are already Islamophobic. They already hate Islam. They already want to see Muslims leave. I think even an MMA fighter, Cowboy Cerrone, right here in New Mexico, he has said Muslims, he hates Muslims, or, and I think others have said, and we don't like Muslim fighters and stuff like this. Is even in that little small microcosm. So it's a travesty that there are people so ignorant who garner a lot of respect from people for other attributes they have. It's a travesty, but it is the way of the world. So with that being the case, we do have to have more information to know about the ones who caused this. We do know that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that there would be a group that would come from his nation who the Quran, when they recite the Quran, it would not pass by their throats, meaning it would have no effect beyond their heart. And they would not really act upon the knowledge. And they would become extremist. And they would, cause damage to the Muslims. And they are known as the Khawarij. And when we look at contemporary groups, and we say groups, not sects, such as ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, the Al-Qaeda of the Maghrib in, some of the North African states, also Al-Qaeda, and other groups that we find that are of that same, not heritage, but that same root and origin of extremism, that they go beyond the bounds of Islam. So Islam tells them one thing, but they believe that they are practicing Islam through spilling blood, through causing terror and chaos. And for someone to be that deviant, to perpetrate these kind of acts against innocent civilians, except through total ignorance and foolishness, they can only think they couldn't have fathomed the repercussions for Muslims who are practicing, who are family and law-abiding people, the repercussions for them and the repercussions for the dawah, for the propagation of Islam and for the representation of Islam. That these people, they actually feed those people who are Islamophobic. And they feed the various communities, whether that be extremist Hindus, whether that be extremist other groups in white nationalism and neo-Nazis and white supremacist groups and others who are anti-immigrant, even though a lot of us are not immigrant, but anti-Islam and so forth. They feed them. They actually provide them fuel in order to try to burn the image of Islam and slander and attack Islam and Muslims. So these types of events and travesties, for example, in contemporary times, from the perspective of, a Muslim perspective and what has happened, for example, just in America, we're not talking about the UK, we're not talking about France, Belgium, and other things. You've had the rise of contemporary groups such as ISIS and before them Al-Qaeda, before them Jamaat-e-Takfeeree wa Hijra, and other groups that have arisen and have done these types of evil acts. For example, 9/11, whatever your thoughts are on 9/11, I mean, as far as who perpetrated it. But regardless, these actions have returned to cause harm to Muslims around the world and the image of Islam around the world, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects his religion and still many more people embrace Islam. But we've seen, for example, 9/11, we've seen various attacks that have happened for us here in America, and that has implications for us here in America. And of course, when you are a minority in general, that those things, that when something happens, it's going to be exacerbated. For example, 1,000 white nationalist neo-Nazi attacks can happen on communities. African Americans, for example, are terrorized every day all throughout this country, which I'm born here. But those things are not usually discussed. And it's usually a one-off in the news, or even, unfortunately, as we respect law enforcement tremendously, but there's many examples, and it's just part of the history of the conflict with minority groups because of a variety of reasons and state oppression. We come from a country where we had segregation. South Africa is a nation of apartheid. So there has been state terrorism. There has been all of these things that foment this type of evil and hatred and violence. Although I've gotten a bit off topic, I still want to say that, unfortunately, due to the rise of these kind of attacks, it's usually, as I said, that it is mentioned and emphasized more so when it is the latest group that needs to be sidelined. For example, Muslims as Muslim minorities in the West, especially here in America. So, as I said, these types of attacks, I believe, groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but in all honesty, I believe a lot of these attacks, especially now, are more so what they refer to as lone wolf attacks. And these are attacks when it's basically an individual. It could be a small cell of individuals who have a similar ideology, a similar mentality, which goes against Islam. And they believe in causing damage and harming and attacking and fomenting violence and spilling blood. And so when people have this type of mentality, it's very difficult, obviously, for state agencies or for anyone to detect it. Because usually the lone wolf, obviously, they're alone. It's like the people, all these kids who are doing school shootings, that people don't call those terrorist attacks, but I think the victims would probably beg to differ, that they were terrorized. The teachers that were killed and victimized, they were terrorized. So whether it's an ideology, whether it's some sort of alienation, these kind of evil things, this evil exists, and this evil will continue to exist. As a society and as Muslims, we can only learn our religion, practice the peace and the harmony and the beauty of Islam, and show that to people. And people who want to accept it and want to understand more about Muslims, come, welcome. If they don't, just don't try to harm us and don't try to harm our communities. And this is kind of the nature of the game. I don't want to just continue to ramble, but we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us all, preserve us all. And that's a beautiful thing when a person is able to make the hijrah. They're able to immigrate to a Muslim land where they feel more safe and they can live. And hopefully Allah blesses you with safety and security that you can stay there and thrive in such a community, as there are many Muslims who are unable to do that. They're unable to, and they also don't find the same refuge. I myself lived in Saudi Arabia for 18 years, so I know what it's like to live in other places, and I lived in Yemen as well. And those are great blessings. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Almighty to accept our good and forgive our evil, protect us from kulli su wa makruh. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.